I'm going to talk about just 4 basic principles described in the book Style. The first of these is to delete meaningless words. By this, I certainly don't mean that there is a list of words that are always meaningless. However, there are some words that are frequently used in a meaningless way. We get into a habit of using them. Partly they might make us sound smarter, or we believe that they do. Partly we just get into the habit of using these words, and they add absolutely nothing, so they dilute the meaning a lot. Notice these next 2 rows of words. I see these a lot in administrative writing, and possibly for this reason, they are often picked up by university students. And again, they tend to add a lot of verbiage without really adding any information. Let's take a look at an example. Productivity actually depends on certain factors that basically involve psychology more than any particular technology. Hopefully you're noticing some words here that appeared on the previous screen. Actually, certain, basically, particular. They don't add anything to this sentence. And you will remember that I pointed out the word factors, and the word involve or involving was also in that second group of words. Let's just see what happens when we get rid of those. You're probably seeing a sentence right now. Let's clean it up. Productivity depends on psychology more than on technology. I think that's a very clear idea. Social media is a certain kind of technology that basically helps various people to stay in touch with virtually all of their friends. We see these words coming up again. What happens if they go away? I want you to think about this phrase a little bit. Is it necessary? Does it really add anything to the sentence? One way of answering that question is to ask whether people who understand what social media is do not know that it's a technology. I can't think of a single person who knows the one and doesn't already know the other, which means that this information I've highlighted right now is redundant. Let's get rid of it. Let's try putting all of this together. Social media helps people stay in touch with their friends. All of those words that we removed didn't contribute to this idea at all, and I think you'll agree that this sentence is much easier to read. Keep in mind that it's not any one particular change that we make to an essay that makes an improvement. Rather, it's the accumulation of many, many small changes that creates an overall impression of an essay that is easier to read and therefore easier to understand. Here's our next strategy. Replace a phrase with a word. The partners had a meeting concerning the issue of money. Now, you saw some of these on that meaningless words list. There will be some overlap in these strategies. The issue of money, or is it just money? Now I'm thinking about this word concerning. I think we could probably replace this verbal with a much simpler preposition. The partners had a meeting about money. So that will be the word that we use to replace a much longer phrase. Another example. This medicine has the ability to cure bacterial infections. This phrase here is very typical of a group of phrases that I'm going to provide another example of in a minute that can all be replaced in a very similar fashion. First, let's get rid of it. Now ask, what one word could fit into that slot to communicate the idea of ability? I'll give you a hint. We can turn to the group of verbs called modals. This medicine can cure bacterial infections. Another example. It is essential that research into this problem be expanded. Now, I hope your brains lit up when you saw this it shift at the beginning of the sentence. And there will be times when you use an it shift in order to put emphasis on another part of the sentence, and the emphasis really is deserved. But it shifting and their shifting are the kind of strategies that we often use habitually, even when they are not necessary. Let's get rid of it. Research is going to be the main character, so let's put it in the subject position. Again, ask yourself, is there one word we could fit into that slot that would communicate the idea of being essential? Did you think of this word? Research into this problem should be expanded. Our textbook showed an example of a modal replacing a phrase, but did not really explain that that was the particular strategy being used. And that's really what I want you to take away from these last two examples, that frequently a group of words can be replaced with just one simple modal. The next strategy, delete needless adverbs and adjectives. I don't mean to say that adverbs and adjectives are always needless, but often they are. They're the kind of words that we frequently use just to make a sentence longer. Maybe we have to meet that word count. But often they contribute nothing to the idea we're discussing. Let's look at an example. Instructors and students are rarely completely honest with each other. There's an adverb. There's an adverb. I think you'll notice that one of these contributes to the meaning of the sentence, and one of these really does not. Hopefully, you will agree that the idea of honesty usually implies the sense of completely. So what happens if we get rid of that? Put them all together. Instructors and students are rarely honest with each other. I don't think anybody's going to be confused by this revised version and wonder, wait a minute, are you talking about complete honesty or incomplete honesty? I think the sentence makes perfect sense as it is. Another example. The owner showed us the old, tired, dilapidated apartment block. Here we've got a series of adjectives, that's right. Old, tired, dilapidated. I think we've got some redundancy here. The way to solve this puzzle is to ask, which word communicates the idea most effectively? Hopefully you agree that that word, which we have seen before in this course, does the job that we're after. The owner showed us the dilapidated apartment block. Our fourth strategy, delete excess meta-discourse. You might remember from the reading that meta-discourse refers to the language we use when we're talking about our language rather than our content. Here's a group of phrases that we use when we want to discuss our own, that is, the author's perspective on the ideas. Here's a group of phrases that we use when we want to give our reader instructions on how they should understand the information. This group of words, which you think of as transitions, help our reader to understand the structure of our essay. These phrases have a job. I don't mean to say that we should get rid of them entirely. I do mean to suggest that we overuse them sometimes, and that's when they become excess, and we should think about deleting them. Here's a really obvious example. The last point I would like to make is that in regard to climate change, it is important to keep in mind that the most significant effect has been sea level rise. I hope you recognized that this phrase might help a reader to perceive the structure of the essay that this passage has been excerpted from. This idea that I would like to make the point is the author giving us his or her perspective on the information. That's just a connecting phrase. In regard to, we've seen that before. It's just meaningless words. It is important to keep in mind that these are instructions to the reader. Let's get rid of all of it. At this point, we really ought to ask, what's the real character of the sentence here? We've got three choices. Is it climate change? Is it the effect? Or is it sea level rise? I think you could make an argument for any one of those three, so I'm just going to choose my personal preference. The most significant effect. I think the most natural way to connect that to climate change is with this word of. And then everything falls into place. The most significant effect of climate change has been sea level rise, which is much more direct and communicates the same idea in far fewer words. Another kind of meta-discourse indirectly attributes ideas to a source. Understand, please, that I am not talking about normal citations. I am talking about phrases like, it has been noted that, it has been established that, it has been observed that, when they are presented without a citation. The idea is that somebody somewhere knows this information, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. The best reason for not telling our readers who the source of this information is that it's no longer important, because specialists already know that this information is true, and they don't need to be reminded where it came from. If you think that specialists might not know where it came from, then we need a citation. For this particular strategy, we're assuming that the information does not require a citation. And that's why these kinds of phrases can be removed. Let's look at an example. High divorce rates have been observed to occur in areas that have been determined to have low population density. I hope you spotted that one and this one. Without a citation, they contribute nothing to the idea. So let's get rid of them. With a few small changes, high divorce rates occur in areas that have low population density. We can make another very small change to this. Notice that when one thing has another thing, we can also say that it is with that thing. So there's no reason we couldn't say high divorce rates occur in areas with low population density. An important exception to this strategy. High divorce rates have been observed in areas with low population density. Chan reported that, blah, 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 fill in a sentence there. Walensa observed that, blah, 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 fill in a sentence or two there as well. This first sentence is not really indirectly attributing the idea to a source. Rather, it's postponing the attribution until sentences that follow. That's a useful strategy if you're going to cite multiple sources, each one in its own separate sentence. Metadiscourse that names a topic without making a point. Again, I see this very frequently in student writing. Here's an example. Brown analyzed the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. He concluded that the philosophers had similar ideas about rhetoric. All this first sentence tells us is that Brown analyzed something. We don't get any interesting information until we learn what Brown concluded. So I'm going to make the radical suggestion that we combine these sentences, and the first step to that is get rid of all of this. Let's just go from Brown to his conclusion. Brown concluded that the philosophers had similar ideas about rhetoric. Now, if we have not previously identified who those philosophers are, then we will need to do so now. So let's bring their names back. Brown concluded that Plato and Aristotle had similar ideas about rhetoric. We didn't need to be told about this concept in 2 sentences. Maybe you're thinking, oh, but we don't know that he analyzed them. Say, well, yeah, we do. That's how scholars come to conclusions. We don't need to be reminded about that.